Greetings. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. I'm Lexi Eve, and welcome to another episode of Walk Magick. So I've covered the subjects of necromancy and working with the dead twice on this channel. And I've touched on the proper attitude towards death in my Liber HHH videos. But I want to do a deep dive on the subject of death from the perspective of the individual, because we're all going to go through this. And while performing the great work, it's something that we have to face and conquer. It's a delicate subject which any individual may understand differently. So in this video, just take what applies and leave the rest, maybe for another day, maybe not. But anyways, I thought of a title that I'm kind of proud of, and so today I want to cover the subject of death in this video that I've coined, Post-mortem, Rigor-Magus, the Thelemic art of dying. Let's begin. A couple months back in that one Liber HHH video, the practice that I described is more intense and a direct version of the Buddhist Maranasati, which is mindfulness of death, where one visualizes the many ways they could die. Though the twist to Liber HHH's visual practice is that it goes into a visual meditation where the magician turns into the sun and there delves into the mysteries of death as change and the ongoing of the soul through energy and solar union, reincarnation, going onward as through the solar identification. Today, the subjects that we're going to cover include Liber 106 / Thelemic Last Rites. Liber 106 is also called On Death or Concerning Death. We're going to cover the astral realm, being absorbed into the infinite, preparing oneself for the journey, the bodhisattva vow, reincarnation, and all the way at the end, very, very briefly, in theoretical physics, there are two subjects that I'll mention, being the theories of consciousness persisting no matter what, and multiversal reincarnation. Initially, what prompted this video was a small book I recently read called Beyond Life and Death, and it's written by A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Prabhupada. And you should see an image of it on your screen. I believe since the 1970s, he operated a group of Krishna worshippers, and I think that they're still ongoing. They have a website where they sell merchandise, all types of altar setups, statues, books, etc. And this entire text covered their views on death and how they prepared themselves. The most interesting points that they hold is that in Hinduism, or at least Vaishnavites, which are Vishnu worshippers of Krishna, they hold the idea of many worlds, where we live in the world of constant life and death cycles that happen relatively fast. Then there are worlds ruled by the classical planets in astrology. Then there is Brahma Loka, the world of truth, which still has, they hold the idea that death still occurs, but lifetimes are drastically longer. Like every day there are many, many, many Earth years. So if you get to Brahma Loka in a future incarnation, your life is going to be very, very long in comparison to an Earth life, but death still happens. And then beyond all other worlds is Krishna Loka, the world of Krishna and Radha, his consort, where there is no death. They claim the best goal is to ascend to Krishna Loka after earthly death, where you are then in perpetual union with Krishna. To achieve this, they mandate a few methods, such as focusing solely on Krishna or chanting the Hare Krishna mantra whilst dying. From this, we can take the method of focusing the mind upon the divine at the time of death. Ultimately, a fundamental part of the great work is preparing oneself for the crossing over from life through death. It is best if you know when and where you will die or how, but better still if you know where you are going afterwards. This removes the fear and angst that many people have about death, that unknown. And further, it removes any sense of worrying. Thus, one can give themselves permission to be less cautious about everything and just focus on what they need to do this incarnation. And that's not to say caution isn't good. Being cautious is good. You should do everything tactfully, with care, and treat all things as if you are finessing an art form at the highest degree. But what I mean is that you will not fear death, and by removing this fear, you can focus solely upon what you need to do without hesitation, when you need to do it, without anxiety over the outcome. One of the most useful methods in this regards is having last rites done upon you. Whereas in Catholicism, one is anointed and forgiven of sin with last rites and then bestowed a pure state of soul to enter heaven, the Thelemic version of last rites is much different. We don't hold to the same idea of sin that the Abrahamic faith, or even Buddhists do with their asavas or cankers, being mental taints, and kilesa, impurities of mind and body. In Thelema, the word of sin is restriction, to bind things on the mental plane so as to limit oneself and thereby balk at doing their will. That is the gravest sin. It leaves one with that sense of unfinished business and thus marks them with an ongoing karma, or at least a need for karma. Note also that in some cases this is not necessarily a bad thing, as we will see in the Thelemic Last Rites outlined in 106. One may will to reincarnate intentionally for any number of reasons. Generally speaking, Thelemites take joy in life and death as another change, and the physical realm is not necessarily to be shunned in the same manner which it is in other systems of esoteric doctrine. But let's first start off here. Let's take a look at Liber 106. Link to the text in the description if you care to see it later on. It is composed of 3 sections, one for each chapter of Liber L. Essentially, it was written for a priestess, presumably of EGC, to use for last rites. However, I find gender irrelevant for using it. Anyone with the skills in bestowing sacraments can perform this for somebody who's going through their final moments. Essentially, you will want to ritualize the text, obviously starting with like the LBRP, perhaps having an anointing of the sick with holy oil in conjunction with some personalized incantations. That would be your basic structure. Then I would recommend laying hands upon the person who is dying, though depending on their condition, this may be done very near to death or weeks prior. So, for example, my teacher was passing from stage 4 cancer and began slipping in and out of dementia. So we chose a moment about a month out from the time he died, where he was fully lucid, just before his mental state rapidly declined, and I bestowed his last rites on him using Liber 106. We felt it was important for him to be coherent and therefore to be able to internalize the words as opposed to just be spoken over. It is, of course, better if you have the text memorized. That always makes the experience much more intimate and meaningful, as it demonstrates your conviction in bestowing the sacrament. The first of the 3 sections is dedicated to Nui. The words of the text remind the sick that they are a star, a being with the course of true will flowing through the inane, that all is Nuid, and it is to her infinite body of space beyond the stars and light that they must inevitably arrive, that one day they will be absorbed into the infinite, and that if it be their will, they can make that venture now. It is not a sorrowful nor scary journey into the unknown. It is into her body which is consciously known that they are venturing. It is already familiar to them, and that it is riddled with joy ineffable. The second section encompasses Hadid, the center of space within the body of Nuid, the individual's point of consciousness in the cosmos. It's a shorter section which urges the individual to make a phallic thrust of will into Nuid. It speaks on the knowledge of life and death, as I've disclosed in this episode today. It urges the individual on, reminding us of our nature as Pan, the All, who frolics through the forests of eternity, which is the very hair of Nuid, the tree of life, Yggdrasil, the structure of root fiber appearances of the galaxies of space, the light which stretches across voids and connects all things. One is that, and they are urged to unite with it now upon leaving the body of gross matter behind. But Section 3 adds that there are those who are not yet ready to meet that permanent embrace. It does not outline shunning the physical world, nor discourage outright reincarnation. Quote, "Art not thine eyes strong enough to bear the starlight? Must thou linger yet a while in the valley? Must thou dally with the shadows in the dusk? Then if it be thy will, thou hast no right but to do thy will. Love still these phantoms of the earth. Thou hast made thyself a king. If it please thee to play with toys of matter, were they not made to serve thy pleasure?" End quote. Something very similar is stated in the end collect of Liber 15, quote, "Whether they will absorption in the infinite, or to be united with their chosen and preferred, or to be in contemplation, or to be at peace, or to achieve the labor and heroism of incarnation on this planet or another, or in any star or aught else, unto them may there be granted the accomplishment of their true wills." End quote. This latter bit informs us the idea of the soul upon leaving the body can venture to stars. Vaishnavites hold the same idea as I mentioned much earlier, and I'm led to believe that this is compatible with the planets of the Tree of Life. You could venture to any star, as well as perhaps literally incarnating in another form on a distant planet in our own physical universe, should there be life anywhere else. In terms of the tree, it is like ascending up to the sphere whose planet rules, based on what degree you have attained, or perhaps on what your nature and where you will to reside in a spiritual form for a while may be. These planetary spheres on the Tree of Life, being below the abyss, are still subject to time, and I would suppose that they are then not permanent residencies and subject to change based on the laws of governing planets, etc., that eventually would come a time where you do transcend that sphere. By performing last rites or having last rites bestowed upon us when that time comes, it's a moment of decision. This completely removes the victimhood of death and suffering and leaves the magician in their final incarnate moments with a choice. There is power. You are subject to the laws of incarnation, but you are free on how you then engage with those laws of change. Do you choose to go on into the infinite and that final embrace of Nuit, or do you choose another incarnation because you feel there is karma that you need to fulfill? You have that choice at the moment of death. It puts the power in your hand. It's not something happening to you. It's something that has to happen, but you have power in that moment. And then this brings us to the next point, the astral realm. Eliphas Levi covers this subject masterfully. I'll paraphrase and add my own interpretations here. Upon death, the ego mingles with the astral form for a period of time. The sankhara, which are mental formations brought on by experienced emotions and conditions based on one's lived experience and karma, these sankharas ultimately play a very big role in what happens next. If the magician has mastered the astral plane, they have an easier time navigating this. Of course, if the death was sudden and left their mind in a state of shock, they may be incoherent and have difficulty navigating regardless. It is then at this point on the astral that they make decisions or take unconscious actions because they are compelled by innate mental programming. The sankhara can be broken up and dispersed, or otherwise remain solidified and incarnate in a single being all over again. If one is fully aware of their actions while in this form, they make a determinative action on their next phase of existence. In the case of a cruel person, Levi recounts that they are not permitted any such decisions and go through a second astral death and are left to disintegrate slowly in the astral plane. For those who do reincarnate, they will go based on where their conditioning and experience lead them, based on what they feel was unfinished and left behind that they need to continue to work on. In life, we generally always can do more things, as existence, the universe is in a constant flux of change and new opportunities are always presenting themselves. Thus, if the soul feels it has more to accomplish, it will reincarnate and try to live more to experience that which they were lacking. If they never attained union, that will be one of the sticking points. If they have goals they strongly need to accomplish, they will cling towards that in the next incarnation. If they are to think they are happy on some other plane of existence, they will aim for higher planes, as I said about the planets earlier, or stars. And for the few who have accomplished the great work, they go through the starry abode and dissolve into that original state of nothingness. Call it Nuit, call it Nirvana, call it Ein Sof, or Pan. It's all the same. Crowley also was aware of the Bodhisattva vow and drew parallels with certain attainments in AA, specifically that of the Master of the Temple. He even alludes that a Thelemite with proper attainment could take this vow in magic without tears, or at least that working without attachment and understanding all things requires the magician to, quote, brush aside any rewards, end quote, from his actions, is compelled towards service to humanity, and in death will naturally, quote, acquire their new vehicle without a moment's delay, so that they may carry on their work of helping mankind with the minimum of interruption, end quote. If you're not familiar with the Bodhisattva vow, it's a Buddhist vow prescribed by Siddhartha, which, upon taking, blocks the individual's access to nirvana, and they are bound towards service to humanity, or rather, until all beings are enlightened. In my opinion, it's the most ambitious and perhaps heroic act one can do whilst performing the great work. Those who take it are intentionally binding themselves to the physical plane in service to others. They seek to enlighten all other beings. The Mahayana myths state that some of them do get reprieves in the highest Buddhist heavens when it is needed, and when called upon, they manifest on earth to aid in the enlightenment of others, especially during times of crisis. For most of the Bodhisattvas, they reincarnate as soon as possible. I recall Crowley stating that within 6 months of death, they are already recycled back into life to continue in their aid and service. Upon taking the vow, they are then dedicated to the highest standards of enlightenment themselves, and one might see them almost as a god incarnate upon the earth. They know exactly where they are going upon death, and it completely removes the fear the average person has when it comes to this mystery. They accept samsara as cleanly as the average person accepts sleep and waking. They are free and liberated to simply do their work. For everyone else, this leads us to how we prepare in life for death. First, I would recommend evaluating your worldview in terms of how you understand existence, from individuality to creation. I do not recommend going to any exoteric religions. Go to the esoteric art forms. In exoteric religions, you're only going to get surface-level doctrines and run the risk of becoming faith-based and relying upon some authority to tell you what to think because it is what they were taught to think. No, I want you to go deeper. To know where you are going, analyze where you came from, so to speak. Whittle away through constant reflection upon how you understand the universe. My personal recommendations are Hermeticism, Taoism, initiatory tantric yoga, Gnosticism, Kabbalah, and then you can go into other religions and see what are the myths surrounding the underworld. Each will have their own cultural trappings and limitations of their times when they were written and thought upon, but will yield some insights as per how some of the greatest thinkers of each age reflected upon the universe. Attempt to unify these ideologies and then transcend them. Find exactly what you hold to be the most true, and then seek to prove it through rigorous experimentation and by crafting arguments for and against your own stance. At the same time, take up practices. That's the most important thing as an occultist, is to actually practice. Get through the books. Books are great, but don't only go into the books. Take what you learn in the books and put it into practice. Do your rituals, do your yoga. In Thelema, there are many theurgical and thaumaturgical practices. These run concurrent with the Book of the Law and identification with the sun as a star in space, whose symbol is the unification of the center and infinite space surrounding it. Discover your nature and pursue that which is in accordance with said nature. Train your mind to become fixed upon this so that no intrusive thought can deter you from it. There are many yogic, Buddhist, and magical practices that all train the mind and invoke certain energies which will yield insights into the spiritual nature beyond one's physical existence. Then, if possible, identify with the most pure form of that spiritual essence. Riddled throughout the holy books, and especially Liber L, are many practical points regarding existence and the nature of life and death. Absorb and consolidate these ideologies within yourself. But first, try to understand them by the same means of arguing against them. Be sure that you are not accepting anything at face value or internalizing a misconstrued notion of a particular truth. Chapter 2, as Hadith speaks, probably has some of the most profound clues for truly understanding the nature of death as simply another change. For time today and for the sanctity of Liber L, I'm not going to block quote any particular passages from any of the holy books. They are there for you to study, and Crowley and many others have commentaries to help you along. So from here, before we close out, I want to just toss out two theories, and you could take them as thought experiments, one from the scientific community, the other from my own preponderance, just mostly for fun. So the first comes from the study of consciousness and quantum physics. This theory is called quantum immortality, and it posits that your stream of awareness always tracks the timelines where you survive. Essentially, what this means is that at every fraction of a second, through every single change that ever occurs on the physical plane, that change, no matter how big or small, always fractures the timelines into multiple branches. Your point of consciousness inevitably flows through the path where you survive. This leads inevitably to a point in time infinitely far from now, where you are a consciousness existing in space all alone after all else has decayed around you. My theory then becomes that your individual consciousness progresses until it re-identifies with the source in perfect union, and you fracture it, creating a whole new universe. That you become God, and you ultimately create the universe all over again from scratch, which would kind of coincide with the yugas of Hinduism. According to the scientist who posited this theory, even if your body died here and now in this timeline, your consciousness would simply persist and jump to a branch in that fractured timeline where you were miraculously saved or cured of whatever was killing you. So now, personally, as someone who has literally faced death on several occasions, it would be quite interesting were this true. That in fact, in that initial timeline, I didn't survive those close encounters, but that in the fractured timelines, in one, my body died and my family and friends grieved. However, my consciousness simply went on to a different timeline in that fractured moment, identical to the one I died in, which branched off at that exact moment of death. So, it's a fascinating thought experiment, and it goes into the question of what is consciousness? What is the mental plane? Where does that consciousness go at the moment of death? So, that's quantum physics theory, and that's the first one of two that I want to talk about. I think it is at least fascinating, at best plausible, and not yet disproven. The theory itself has been taken into multiple directions by researchers. One group holds that the brain may simply be an antenna for a pool of consciousness which is received, and upon the brain ceasing, that pool of awareness simply flows into an identical brain in an identical timeline. So this next theory concerns the multiverse, which is time, space, things that I'm very fascinated with. It's something that I happen to think of while contemplating the nature of reality regarding mortality, that upon death you reincarnate, not necessarily in this timeline or universe, but either in one which is identical or drastically different, and you're literally reborn as a baby in an identical timeline. Or it could be a timeline where, a universe where you incarnate as your best friend in grammar school. Well, you're going to live that life now. Your consciousness enters that form in that next incarnation, or somebody else. In either case, you are still your ego, but it may enter into a new iteration of life, which is, like I said, identical to the one you have now, in which case you get to relive this experience and make new decisions, or one which is entirely different. This can go many ways, but essentially, if you reincarnate as yourself, as you physically are, in an alternate timeline, you get to relive this experience, but hopefully have some unconscious training which allows you to make better choices. or if you haven't grown, you end up making the same ones. And around you go through samsara until you attain union and mastery of life. In which case, they may remain in spiritual form for a time or simply attain union with that, capital T, that. Or you could perhaps incarnate as another person who is in this timeline from past, present, or future in an identical universe, yet you carry your sankhara and karma with you into that new life as that person. It's also theoretically possible. With the multiverse in mind, you wouldn't just simply die and be reborn into a new reincarnation later in this universe from the present, but you could be born into any of the infinite iterations of reality. So I think this makes the task of karma and sankhara much more applicable for determining your new incarnation, since whatever decisions you make here and now could determine your new life in a universe of infinite possibilities. You can make decisions now which catapult you into a world completely different from Earth, on a world as a life form not even found in our current universe. So I think it just makes the possibilities limitless, and in that sense takes the concepts of infinity and Ein Sof Or to a level that is firmly and truthfully unfathomable. So I think these last two concepts are very incomplete thoughts, I admit, but I did think that they are fun thought experiments, and I wanted to toss them out there to you if you care to mull them over. But with that, this is my episode on death from a Thelemic perspective, with two addendums of kind of quantum physics tacked on at the end. I hope it demystifies the ordeal, removes the dread formally, and really does shine a light on death being simply another change. One which is not so scary, and which, like any act of love, can be embraced with utter joy. And I think 100% we go on, but it's just a matter of what decisions we make, and I think that there's power in that. Love is the law, love under will. Catch you on the next one.